This podcast has been made possible by Ledge.
Hi, this is Gina Mastantuno, the CFO of ServiceNow, and you're listening to the CFO Thought Leader Podcast.
This is episode 823.
Well, fundamentally, AvePoint is a software company, geographically dispersed. We're a global company. About 55% of our revenue comes outside the U.S., 45% here. That kind of distinguishes us from many other companies, in terms of the size of our company, but being so geographically dispersed and really taking advantage of that. And I do think that helps us in some of the tough times that we're going through almost now, where we're seeing a lot of stress in the market and in companies. And we've been able to kind of, I think, insulate a little bit from that just based on the fact that we've got many different markets that we play in.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's show, we speak with CFO Jim Caci of AvePoint. The big city addresses that frequently prettify the office locations of esteemed accounting houses have continued to be a reliable draw for 20-something-year-old accounting grads eager to be counted among urban professionals. Thus, we would not have been surprised to learn that back in the late 1980s, when recent grad Jim Caci was assigned to the Arthur Andersen's Roseland, New Jersey office, he experienced what might have been called a ho-hum moment. Not so, Caci tells us. Roseland afforded him opportunities his big city peers would never come to know. We'll find out what those were and much more after this. Does your finance team struggle with routine tasks like reconciliation and manually managing multiple bank accounts? Many tech companies today have complex finance operations and massive amounts of data in different disconnected silos. Whether you're reconciling across 6 different payment processors or between NetSuite and the bank, closing the books can be a nightmare. Ledge has found a better way. Ledge is a finance operations platform that connects all your banking, payment, and accounting systems into one unified platform. Ledge automates revenue reconciliation across all systems, right down to the transaction level, and instantly matches payments, invoices, refunds, chargebacks, or any other transaction. Ledge gives you real-time visibility into your cash position across all accounts and alerts you about issues and at-risk funds in real time, so you can act in real time. And get this, Ledge requires no engineering resources. Ledge plugs right into your existing stack, so you can get set up instantly. Ledge puts finance teams back in control. Learn more at ledge.co. Hello, we're speaking with Jim Caci, CFO of AvePoint. Jim, welcome.
Thank you, Jack. Great to be here.
So, Jim, we always begin by asking our guests to look back for us. And we're wondering if you have some experiences you can share with us that you feel prepared you for a finance leadership role. What comes to mind for you?
Well, I think it does start maybe even before my career. I think where I went to college in New Jersey had a very strong focus around, finance, accounting, public accounting. A number of my instructors were former public accounting, managers and even a partner. And I think their focus was really on, if you're going to be an accounting major, you want to go into public accounting, you want to get that strong foundation to then lead and kind of start your finance career. But it starts with a great foundation. So I think I've really got that in college. And then that led to, my first opportunity, which was in public accounting at Arthur Andersen in the New Jersey office. which was a little unique and maybe different because it wasn't New York, it wasn't the big massive office. It was a relatively small office in Roseland, New Jersey, and it gave us a great opportunity to run very independently. And so I think I was exposed, within that environment to a lot of partners that maybe I wouldn't have been exposed to in a big office. And I think it allowed me to participate on engagements and clients from very large ones to very small ones. And that kind of exposure and that breadth of experience of the big clients, understanding what that was like. But then also we had an enterprise group which was focused on those small technology companies that were ultimately going to be the next, Microsoft. And we were working with those clients when they were $5 million in revenue and working with them to try and get them to be successful, helping them be successful to ultimately be those next big technology companies. And that was a very exciting path for me, and also to be involved in that because it was new to the firm, and it was really New Jersey was almost a pilot office.
It does sound like an interesting office, and it does sound like you were fortunate to have landed there. Can you maybe, narrow your lens a little bit and on a specific project for us, just to really drive home the types of people or the nature of the work you became involved with?
I can think of a few things. One in particular, and Jack, this is going to date me, but one of the first projects I worked on was the splitting up of AT&T into all of the Baby Bell companies. And at that time, that was AT&T was headquartered in Basking Ridge, and we went down and were working on a project as Arthur Andersen in terms of really helping them separate the company into the Bell operating companies. And so here I was, a second year person, really in the beginning of my second year out of school, and I was helping run a project to actually separate and help them separate AT&T into the Baby Bells. And it was sitting in on meetings and being asked to present in front of the senior leadership of AT&T on what we were doing and how that was going to happen. And to me, to be a young 22-year-old kid, it was, I thought, a very unique situation, very stressful situation, but also I think gave me the confidence coming out of that hey, there's stuff we can do here, we can be successful, and I was just trying to do my little part.
Well, that period of time, there was so many business headlines around that undertaking that I'm sure you had peers and colleagues or other fellow friends who were like, wow, you're involved in that. Did it last 10 months? Did it last a year? Did it?
Yeah. I mean, this was an interesting project, right? Because it had multiple levels to it. And as you can imagine, right, there's a whole legal element to it. There was a whole business process element to it. And then the piece that we were heavily involved in was almost the infrastructure and the accounting and the separation of, if you can picture, AT&T had one billing system, it had one kind of accounting system, and now they needed to literally separate that into I think at that time it was 9 Bell operating companies. And we were part of that process of how do you separate all of these, this one accounting system into 9. And it was multiple systems, very complicated. We're still talking about, this is in the 80s, right? So everything was mainframed and all of that. So it was a very complex, very highly intensive, very long project. I was on it for probably about 10 months. And it was one of those where we had probably half the office at any given point in time was somehow associated or touching on that project. And this, by the way, ultimately was one of the first projects of what later would become Andersen Consulting and then ultimately Accenture. So it was very early on in those kind of consulting days within the accounting firms.
Yeah, that's before the divorce. If it's the late 80s, those two organizations were just beginning to have some internal friction and infighting.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, very much.
And at the same time, it doesn't sound like, as you described it, it had to do with infrastructure processes.
Yeah.
It was much broader than the accounting.
Oh, yeah.
And do you think that influenced your path going into the future? Did it remove you somewhat from just being an accountant or thinking of yourself just as an accountant? Or did that come years later?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I would say yes, that it definitely had an influence. Maybe not even so much on the accounting, but just how I thought about a variety of things, including relationships. Because as you can imagine, a big project like that, it is about getting the work done, but there's also managing all the different relationships, not only within your own team, but then you have the client and who they're reporting to and what their expectations are. So there's a massive amount of understanding that has to go on to try and be successful there. So I do think that added and was very beneficial for me. And I've been able to utilize that throughout my career. So I definitely think that you're right, that it had an impact. I think there are a couple other things later on in my career that also had a bigger impact, taking me away from the accounting side. And we can touch on some of those for sure.
Opportunities such as that one no doubt kept you there. It was what was your tenure with the firm?
Yeah, I was there through. I was a senior manager, so I was about 8 years, 8 to 9 years, and then ultimately left to join a client.
So give us the scoop. How does that finally happen? Because I have to believe there were opportunities earlier, but somehow this was the one that you make the jump. Why? Fill us in. What's going on?
Yeah, great question. So, like I said, I was a manager at Andersen. I was working with a client of mine who was going public. It was a company called Glasgow Communications, and so we were taking that company public. And this is back in the 90s, and the rules were very different back then in terms of yes, we were the auditors, but we were also advisors to a certain degree. And we didn't believe it violated any independent standards back then. But we were trying to do the best we could for the client, right? In terms of them going public, we assisted them, we helped them write the S1. We did everything we could to try and make their lives, as productive as possible in terms of getting through the going public process. So, we worked extensively with this customer or client. They went public. And then shortly thereafter, the CEO and I had a great relationship. And he's like, what's it going to take me to get you to come work for us? We need a CFO. The company really well. You've done a great job helping us get public. Now that we're public, we need your help even more. And so that dialogue went on a few months, and ultimately he beat me over the head until I acquiesced. But no, I was happy to join. It was tough to leave Andersen. It had been a great experience. But also I did see the opportunity. It was a technology company, and I did see the opportunity to really do something unique and special, and had a great relationship with the CEO. And so it was almost easy from that point of view, joining the company. It was hard to leave Andersen, but easy to join the company. And that turned out to be a very, fruitful opportunity. And I learned a lot during those, the next 6-8 years.
Well, that's pretty. And you join as the CFO, or do you have like an interim period? You're just stepping right into the role.
So yeah, I left Andersen and then joined as the CFO. I think I was 29 at the time.
Yeah.
And so it was, it's funny. We talk about like leaving public accounting and joining a client is not very unique, right? I'm sure you've heard this story many times, right? It's not unique at all. I do think joining as the CFO is more unique. Now, granted, I wasn't joining Microsoft.
It is. That's why I'm drilling down, and I have a follow-up for you because, very often they'll leave. And now you were a senior manager. You had put in a good number of years. But for a CEO to approach you and say, he's my CFO, you must have exhibited wonderful communication skills. You're going to be on the front lines talking to investors and shareholders. Not everyone back at Arthur Andersen had that set of skills. So you had already, in my mind, demonstrated to the CEO that you were I don't know, you must have had some presence having stepped before their board in the past. Was there a place and time where you made this outstanding impression?
Yeah, no, I mean it's a great question. I think you're being generous, so I appreciate that. So thank you. But I do think that I did. The CEO and I did get along extremely well during the whole IPO process, which, as you know, right, is a very stressful, a very chaotic at times. And this is in the '90s, right? So this predates a lot of the digital communication we have now and how we share. We were still faxing stuff, right, back and forth. So this is a very unique time at that point.
Yeah.
And you're right, we did build a trust. I think he felt very comfortable that I had the best company, the best interests of the company at heart. I think he felt like he could trust me. I think I had demonstrated enough technical knowledge, right, on the accounting side, and that could do the job. He felt confident I could do the job. Having not done the private accounting job yet, he felt confident enough that I could. And I think it's the relationship thing that you touched on. Like, I just think he had the confidence that, hey, I've worked with Jim for the past 6 months. He's been at every attorney meeting, every board meeting, and he's represented extremely well. And I think he'll do the same when he's on this side of the fence. And so I do think that gave him the confidence, right, to say, hey, you're the right guy for the job, even though you don't have any of the experience yet on the private side.
Well, you do go on and capture the experience, the knowledge, and you have a string of CFO chapters, one after the other. And tell us something about the journey here, the types of companies you become involved with, and then we'll talk to you about AvePoint. But it seems like there's a variety of transactions here. Some of these, I imagine, are public, some are private. What would you tell us?
Yeah. So I think, my journey has been like a journey, right? Like all of us, right? And it's kind of had, um, a variety of things, both from public companies, like we were just speaking about, to private companies that were definitely different and unique. And so we also went through, that over the past couple of years, SPAC transactions have become very popular. Well, we used to call those in the old days, they were just reverse mergers. And so I had been involved in one of those as well in the past. So I think my career journey has been an evolution, which is, for me, has been fascinating. It's covered a variety of different industries, mostly technology related, but some software, some hardware, some SaaS related, some combination of the two. And each time I felt like I was learning so much about a different industry, even if it was within the technology industry. So that's been for me, been very, I don't know whether that's exciting or it keeps it fresh, that, it's something new constantly. So that's been exciting. And they've been small companies and they've been much larger companies.
Private equity backed some of them, and some of them,
Most of them.
are they?
Yeah, most of them. Um, yeah, and maybe we touch on this later too. But so when I left AvePoint the first time, it was to join a SaaS company, private equity based, and that company was ultimately sold to WeWork. And then I was with a healthcare technology healthcare company based in New York City that we ultimately sold to GE Healthcare. And that was an exciting transformation, because again, it was something very unique. We were selling to nursing homes and assisted living communities, as well as directly to the public, which I had never been involved in anything that was selling directly to consumers. So that was very unique and different. But again, I think was all helping shape kind of where we are today, right? And all of those experiences for me have been very good.
Well, why don't we talk about AvePoint? And you kind of tipped your hand there, yeah. So you were with AvePoint several years, and you move on to another opportunity, it looks like, and then you return 7 years later, and that was 2020, I think. So you have a second chapter. But We'll ask you some questions in a little while about that. Let's just find out about AvePoint right now. Tell us about AvePoint. What does it do, and what are its offerings today?
Sure. Well, fundamentally, AvePoint is a software company. So first and foremost, so we're a software company, geographically dispersed. We're a global company. About 55% of our revenue comes outside the U.S., 45% here. We're headquartered in the U.S., but we have a global reach. That kind of distinguishes us from many other companies, in terms of the size of our company, but being so geographically dispersed and really taking advantage of that. And I do think that helps us in some of the tough times that we're going through almost now, where we're seeing a lot of stress in the market and in companies. And we've been able to kind of, I think, insulate a little bit from that, just based on the fact that we've got many different markets that we play in. And then as what does our software do? Essentially, at its core, we're a SaaS management platform, in terms of we're helping companies, manage their SaaS infrastructure and really their digital workplace environment. So whether that's Office 365, if it's Google, if it's their Salesforce environment, we help manage all of the data that companies have to manage within those systems. And then we also manage who has access to those systems and then what they have access to. And we would call that like governance around the provisioning of resources. So that's essentially our focus. We're a leader in that space, which has been great. We've been doing it a long time. The company's 20 years old. We just went public 2 years ago. But we've got a very tried and true offering that's been steadily growing. And we've got a management team that's been around for a long time. I'm a newbie having come back, but we've got, our CEOs are the founders of the company. And then our senior management team, probably on average, has been with the company 14 to 15 years. So lots of, stability in the management team.
And it's obvious, I guess, as with every technology company, they continue to evolve over time. And 20 years ago, it wasn't about managing SaaS data, and even 7 years ago,
Right.
the data challenge wasn't the challenge it is today, and the data reservoirs and pools of data within organizations. So this is a newer opportunity for the firm overall. How am I doing? Am I?
You're spot on. I mean, if you think back to even, let's say, 10 years ago, the company was essentially a perpetual license company where we used to sell perpetual licenses and we would sell maintenance, right? That was the model for all software companies at that time. And then we were starting to evolve into SaaS, and we were really protecting people's SharePoint environment for Microsoft at that point. We were kind of single threaded on Microsoft's SharePoint product, and we provided those services around just SharePoint. Fast forward to now 10 years, and obviously the world of technology, as you've alluded to, has changed dramatically. SaaS is here. We started that transition probably 6 years ago of starting to make the offering, and then literally now all of our customers are now either, there's really no one on the old perpetual license system. So that transformation has happened, which is great. And we've branched out from Microsoft. Now, they're still our predominant, who we support in terms of, but when we think about even all the businesses today, Microsoft is still the dominant player within your environments as a company. And so we support that, but then we support, Google applications. We support, Salesforce as well, Box, Dropbox, all these other platforms that people are using to share information and collaborate in the new world. We support those environments so that they're, both secure and, protected.
Now, it's a publicly traded firm today. And were you involved with the IPO way back when, or no? Did that happen before your tenures?
Yeah, so we went public about 2 years ago. So you're right. Prior to that, we're not a public company. We were a privately held company, PE backed, but privately held. And then I came back shortly after we went public. So I was kind of advising the company, if you will. But then I rejoined the company after we went public.
It's interesting because that's not a short period of time that you're away from the company. And a lot happens, I think, data wise. And the tools have become more sophisticated for finance leaders to look into the business. Some of what you mentioned, Salesforce, all that data that's become available now. So it would be interesting to hear as you step back into the company how your lines of sight might have gone a little further, a little deeper, more real-time data, perhaps. I don't know, but what would you share with us?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. You're right. It is very different than when I was here 10 years ago. Much different company. At that point in time, we probably had 20 people in the finance group, globally dispersed, but the bulk of them sitting here in New Jersey. And now we've got a finance group of about 70 people, with the majority of them being geographically dispersed and not sitting in Jersey City. So very different, even just from a physical perspective. And then you're right, like the what we're focused on has changed. Particularly in the SaaS world, there are certain key metrics that we're looking for and focused on, whether that's our ARR metrics and NRR and GRR. These are key focus items that we're looking at literally monthly and clearly quarterly, but literally on a daily basis. So those are key. And then things like adoption of the platform. One of the key things for any SaaS platform is to ensure that the customers are getting the value that they perceived when they bought the product. Are they in fact getting that value? Because that's the only measure of whether they're going to be, number one, if they're happy, and then number two, if they're going to renew. And that's obviously a key driver for any SaaS company, is that you spend a lot of money to acquire a customer, but then the intention is you hold on to that customer for many years to get your payback. And they only, we know it just in our own lives, right? You only continue to use a product if that product is providing you value. And so we've got a bunch of metrics now, both in our platform that give us a lot more telemetry on utilization. And then we've engaged some other outside platforms and tools to help us evaluate, customer health, to ensure that, customers are getting as much value out of the products as we believe they should. And then ultimately, that gives them, hopefully a return on their investment, and they'll want to continue to use us.
Want to ask you about, you gave us a sort of the number 70, I think you said, finance professionals. We're just always curious about the talent within the ranks, and
Sure.
And of course the financial planning and analysis folks, many of whom might be embedded or traveling around trying to understand the business better for you. What would you tell us about your FP&A team and how you might use them?
Yeah, no, it's great. So our FP&A team is a global team. So we've got people situated here in the U.S., but then we also have people sitting in other jurisdictions. So we have people in, for example, Japan, in Europe, and in other parts of Asia. So we've got really a geographically dispersed finance team, as well as an FP&A team. And I think that's helpful because it puts the team closer to the actual operations of the business. Because as I mentioned, like 55% of our business is happening outside the US. And so it's really important that we're close to that and we can be part of, helping those leaders make better decisions. And I think having finance team members, really FP&A, helps to do that. So they need to be relatively local to really be able to contribute at that level. So our team is a decently sized team, and then it's geographically dispersed. So that, to me, that's a real positive.
Is growth organic as well as being driven via M&A?
Yeah, we actually, in 2022, we made 4 very small acquisitions. So they were very kind of strategic. One was almost a people acquisition, and the others were really technology to really help support our platform. So the way we think about our product, sorry, go ahead, Jack.
I was going to say offshore or in the U.S. are these?
So one was headquartered in Canada. One was headquartered in South Korea. One was in Singapore. And the other was in the UK. So literally kind of, we got the globe covered, I think, but all relatively small. And the South Korea acquisition was more of a people one to penetrate we believe that South Korea market has a lot of huge opportunity going forward, almost like Japan for us was 10 years ago. So we see that as a growing market. We wanted to get in early. And then the other acquisitions were more technology based. And yes, we do continue to expect that we'll be acquisitive in the future. But we're both growing organically. Most of our growth is coming organically, and these have been nice little supplements, but they've been relatively small. But I would expect us to do more of that in the future.
And you mentioned you have Korea. You've mentioned having talent in the Far East. Can you tell us, is that geography going to play an important part in the company's future more so than in the past, or how do you look at it?
Yeah, I mean, we see we're seeing growth around the globe. If we look even at Q1, and now I know Q2's over, but we haven't released earnings yet. But we saw nice growth in Q1 across all of we kind of break up into three different segments, North America, EMEA, and APAC. And we saw strong growth in all three segments for our SaaS platform, even our services. So yeah, we see strong growth coming from all sectors. And but again, we would expect to see that outside of the U.S. Continues to grow and probably continues to increase just the numbers themselves. Maybe we get to like 60% is outside the U.S. But again, all three regions are growing very strong.
Well, we're going to jump to our finance strategic moment question, which will allow you to zero in on a moment of insight that you've experienced along the way in your career. We're just looking for one. And again, we're always looking for a good story if you have one for us. But however you'd like to tell it, appreciate it, Jim.
I had two stories that I think are interesting, but I'll give you the one, and then you tell me if you want to hear the second. So the first kind of, for me, financial strategic, kind of crossroads for me, or something that had a significant impact for me is something that happened at a technology company that I was referring to that we sold to GE Healthcare. And, I had joined the company as the CFO, and then also then took on the title of COO shortly thereafter. And we were in the process of negotiating a deal with GE to make an investment in the company. And this was a healthcare product that was a digital product that would go in a home or an assisted living facility. And so interesting product, both the hardware piece and the software, which was SaaS. So a very interesting combination. And, so everything was going great. Unexpectedly, the CEO had to leave the company, and we were left with a choice at the board as to, okay, what do we do now? We're in the process of closing a deal with GE, and we need to continue this process. And so the board said, hey, Jim, we'd like you to step up and be the CEO. And so I had never been the CEO before of a company, but trying to be a good team player, I said, yes, I'm happy to do it. And first, let's get the deal done with GE. So flew to Wisconsin, told them what was going on, assured them that we could continue and no hesitations. They made the investment. And then now we were on to the second piece. And this is, for me, really the story, which is never having been responsible for sales or the number. I now was responsible for hitting a target that not only we had committed to the board, but we had also committed to now our new partner, GE Healthcare, and we're going to hit these numbers. And so now I went from being just the CFO to I'm the chief salesperson, and I got to make sure we're delivering against the sales numbers. So the next year was literally just working with our sales teams, understanding our quotas, understanding the challenges of hitting quota, understanding our product deficiencies that we needed to improve to be able to sell the product, to then going out and closing deals around the country. So lots of airline miles that year of just all over the place. But for me, the key impact it had on my career was I went from being just the finance person or guy to understanding now what it took to close deals, how hard it was in some situations to actually hit those sales numbers that people were previously just giving me. It's like, you got to commit to this number and there's no ifs, ands, or buts. Now I was the one that had to deliver the number. And I think that gave me a very different perspective and maybe more unique perspective than some of my colleagues, other CFOs have when you're sitting in the boardroom, when you're sitting in even your executive management meetings, talking about how we're going to hit the numbers. I just feel like I am more better equipped and understand those challenges and hopefully can then maybe translate that into some constructive ways of maybe trying to get there, having been through it myself. So I think that was a very unique experience that a lot of CFOs don't have the opportunity to have. And as painful as it was at the time, I think it is now over the past 12 years since, I think it's really benefited me well in being a better CFO.
Nice. Good story. We'd love a second story if you.
All right. So the second story was one maybe a little bit more finance related, a little more tactical, but I think your best CFOs step out of just your CFO role and can really be more of a collaborator with the rest of the business. So we had a situation at I was part of an IT services company where we did a lot of staffing projects and we did a lot of, full projects for customers. And we, in particular, had this one telecommunications company that we were doing a ton of business for, mostly project work related. And we had a meeting with them, and one of their stakeholders, pretty senior level person in their IT group, said that within their organization, they were trying to make most of their costs as variable as possible. Pretty sound thing to do, right? They're a Fortune 500 company. They want to make everything as variable as possible. So when they need to tighten their belts, they have the ability to tighten their belts, right? So it makes perfect sense. So as you would imagine, their biggest expense was people. So what they started to do with us is they wanted to outsource as many of their IT projects as possible to not have the headcount that if then the project ended, they didn't have to terminate 150 people. They just didn't renew the contract and they didn't have the PR nightmare and what have you. So we were a partner of theirs helping them execute on this strategy. It's going great, generating a lot of business for them, helping them achieve their objectives. So, win-win. We then had a meeting and they were telling me that, we're trying to even be more variable. So I asked them, well, what are your next, if people is your major cost, and so they said, rent is our next largest expense. So we are trying to figure out ways to reduce our rent. So, and it wasn't just my idea, but we came back to them with a plan that said, okay, maybe as we're delivering these projects, because we would deliver these projects, but we would send them 100 people to sit in their facility and deliver the project in their premise. So we said, well, what if we delivered you the people and we rented the space that was near your facility so you could come and supervise or check in? And so then when the project's over, you don't have the fixed cost of the rent. And so what we did is we took let's say it was $50 an hour a person for the project, and that's how we would bid it out. We said it's no longer 50, it's 70. But the 70 includes the rent, it includes PCs, it includes blah, 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 everything. So you get a project now that is turnkey and you don't need the space and everything else. They loved the idea, and we wound up selling that to them on multiple projects. And we took our revenue from, tens of millions of dollars, like maybe let's say 15 million, to like 115 million in the course of a year and a half. And so I think that creativity of sitting down and trying to figure out the art of the possible, and then weighing the risks, because now we had the rent, right? So weighing those risks against the benefits, I think is a role that finance can play, but it has to be in concert with the rest of the organization. And in that example, it really worked out well because we were able to deliver really successful projects for the customer. They were super happy because they were able to achieve the two goals they were looking for, maybe three: successful projects, but then also variable cost on their people, and then variable cost on another huge fixed cost previously, rent. So win-win. And, it turned out to be very good for our company as well.
From episode 874, this is 1 Minute with CFO Wellen Chan from Grafana Labs.
It's my job to worry about everything. I keep looking over my shoulder of like, hey, how's the macro is going to impact us? I can't forecast what the macro is going to look like. I can't forecast if it's going to be recessions or when the recession is going to end. But what we can do is we can prepare ourselves on the different scenarios and what we're going to do about it. Our focus is going to continue to be like, hey, we want to invest for the long term, but we want to make sure it's a balancing act that we don't overextend ourselves. So that means on an ongoing basis, on a monthly basis, we continue to forecast. We use data to drive a decision to see if there's any signal to tell us, and we continuously adjust our plan as we move forward.
We're going to jump to what we refer to as our mentoring round, where we were talking about that first CFO role that you stepped into. But the first question of the mentoring round is, what is that piece of advice you would have given yourself back in time when you first stepped into that role, that first 30 or 60 days you wish somebody had told you this? What comes to mind? Anything?
Yeah. So this advice, maybe the way to change your question is, I actually got this advice and I didn't take it. So this one might be not, I wish somebody had told me. This is, somebody did tell me and I wish I had listened. So this came, I referred earlier to this enterprise group within Arthur Andersen. And so I had a customer or a client in that time frame that was a software company in New Jersey, small company. And the CFO there had given me this advice. And he said, Jim, at some point you're going to leave Andersen and you're going to be sitting in my shoes. He said, the one thing I can tell you you should do is, when you're going through your budgets and times are tough, you are going to say, I can do without these things. And whether it's reducing your headcount or not increasing it the way you think you should, you're going to say, I don't need to do that. I'll take one for the team and I'm going to either reduce or just not expand as much as I should. And so he said that, it resonated. I'm telling you the story now. So it obviously, I remembered this very vehemently. And I will tell you that, but that is our biggest challenge, I think, being either the CFO or just in finance, is that you see all of the numbers and you see all the implications. And so then your first reaction, or at least I should say, my first reaction has always been, we can do it better with less. And, unless you have a real plan from a technology point of view or something that is actually going to make it more efficient, that is not good advice in terms of we will be able to do it better with less. And so that CFO echoing to me, don't reduce your staff, invest in your finance team, because that will pay huge dividends if you have the right talent, providing the right information to the organization. It is going to pay dividends as opposed to being a cost. And so I think now, like if I were speaking to my younger self, that first CFO job, I would be saying like, you knew that, you didn't execute on it as well as you should have. And therefore, if I could go back in time, I would be probably listening and then executing upon what I heard. I'd be doing that more than I did.
Okay. We always like to ask our guests to reflect a little on the personal side for us. We're wondering if there's a personal habit that you're known for, maybe part of a daily routine, something you do that sets you apart. Anything come to mind?
Yeah.
Maybe a family member would point it out.
Yeah.
Maybe they'd say, "Oh, he's always done that." Yeah.
It's interesting. Like I don't think I'm that unique. I think it comes down to your basic stuff, right? I think I've worked hard, so I think I get up every morning and maybe it's cliched, right? But you got to show up and then work. When we were all in the office, it was, hey, show up early and then leave late. Like put the work in, put the effort in, and if you put the effort in, it's going to pay off. And maybe, I'm sure you've heard this a million times too. I think the harder you work, the luckier you get too. And it's just that I think if you're working hard, good things happen. Doesn't mean, they happen every minute, but I do think you give yourself more opportunities to have good things happen. And then you have to be lucky, like you have to be in the right place at the right time, whether it was that first CFO role. I mean, it was luck that I got put on that job that ultimately they went public and then I became the CFO, right? If I wasn't put on that job as a client, things could be very different. So I do think there's a lot of luck, but I do think you help your luck by working hard and obviously smart, but I think you have to put the time in.
Along the way, did a book influence you in some way? Business book doesn't have to be, it might be something you escape with, but would you have a book selection for us?
Yeah, it's funny, right? Like there's this book called, it's just resonated with me since I read it. And I think there's some really good messages in it. So I'll say it's not a business book, but it's a book called Into Thin Air. I don't know if you've ever heard of that book, but it's a book.
Is that yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's okay. It's a book by John Krakauer. He was on the Everest expedition back in the 90s, the worst disaster on Everest ever. And fascinating book, like just unbelievably fascinating, riveting. But there are so many, I think, stories within that book of teamwork, of unselfishness, that I've tried to apply in the business world, right? And it's the, everything, when you look at that disaster, everything had to go wrong. And unfortunately it kind of did. And it's anywhere along the way, things could have been different. Right. And so for me, I've tried to use that in the business world and in our challenges that we face every day is that, okay, well, that's the challenge we have in front of us. What can we do to change the course of where this is headed? And because I do think, just like luck plays a huge part, but I do think if we focus on what can we do to change an outcome, then I do believe we can change that outcome. And, fortunately at AvePoint, we have a lot of people that have that same kind of mentality, which is great. And so that creates a great culture and a great teamwork environment. And I do think that allows us to do some incredible stuff. But again, I think that's the message, at least for me, from that book. And I've tried to use that, since reading it. So if you get the chance, I would highly recommend it.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And we are up to our final question where we're going to ask you to look forward finally. And we want to know about the next 12 months and what your priorities as a CFO are for that period. What would those be?
Yeah. So I think we've kind of, as a public company, right, we've had to communicate this publicly. And I mean, I've been pretty clear on it, right, which is, we're focused on profitable growth as a company. So, 5 years ago, even 4 years ago, many technology companies, it was growth at all costs, right? Just focus on growing. And all of your metrics were focused around that, that just focus on growth. And kind of like we were talking before, now those metrics are shifting And for us, the focus is on profitable growth. So we want to continue to grow. We think the market opportunity is huge. So the market's there, but we want to do it responsibly and focus on profitable. So we're measuring things now. Obviously, the P&L comes into play very heavily. We're focused on efficiency. We're focused on measuring all of those things in terms of, are we getting the best value for the dollars we're spending? And so it's great for me to look at that, because then when I jump on calls with customers, I know that they're having the same concerns on their side. And the beauty of our platform and software is that it does allow our customers to ultimately save money in what they're doing. So I think we're symbiotic in that way, that we're trying to grow profitably, and then what we're doing is helping our customers ultimately save money as well. So there's a good relationship between the two. But for us, that's really the 12 months is focus on growing, but also managing the bottom line and growing profitably.
Jim Caci, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thanks, Jack. I appreciate it.
Hello, Thought Leader listeners. As you have perhaps already heard or even seen, we're now featuring the career lessons and moments of strategic insight shared by our CFO guests as Thought Leader videos. You can now find these videos on our blog at cfothoughtleader.com and, of course, our newsletters, but also on LinkedIn. If you haven't already, please go ahead and follow our CFO Thought Leader LinkedIn company page, and you'll be certain not to miss a single Thought Leader video debut. CFO Thought Leader, the #1 thought leadership platform exclusively for and by CFOs. As always, thank you for listening.